Hi, I'm Felipa, and this is day 38 of my year-long reading plan to get through the whole Bible. So I'm in Deuteronomy, and we start with the purpose of the law and an exhortation to obey it. And basically, as we mentioned yesterday, this word is the root of a Greek word, meaning just a recap of like laws and statutes. And so this whole section, this whole book is about recapping everything that God has commanded thus far. Starting with this little part here, it says, the commandments which the Lord your God commanded to teach you. And so I find that piece interesting because it's God basically saying, as if he's commanding himself, that it's his obligation to teach the people the commandments and the statutes and the judgments. Otherwise, they wouldn't know what to follow. And it goes into just reviewing, follow God, worship God, don't worship fake idols. And we go into this little piece here. And it says that, when you have the olive trees in your garden and all these things and you have eaten, then beware lest thou forget the Lord. And so, it's like when things are happy and going well, you have no worry in sight. That's when you shouldn't forget that God is the one that blessed you with that life. And we continue on here, and it says, and the Lord commanded us to do all these statutes, to fear the Lord our God for our God always, for our good always, that he might preserve us alive as it is at this day. And so it's saying, I wrote here, God showing he is fair and merciful because he already gives man the rules which will keep man in God's favor. So he's not playing games. He's very clear on what you need to do in order to keep his favor. We keep going, bunch more rules again. And in chapter 8 here, it says an exhortation to obedience and remembrance. And it says, and thou shalt remember all the way which the Lord thy God led thee these 40 years in the wilderness to humble thee and to prove thee to know what was in thy heart, whether thou wouldst keep his commandments or not. And so I like that section because it's basically saying, when God was making the people of Israel travel for all these years, he was still looking out for them, and he knew that they needed to be humbled. And he even says in this one section, it says, I humbled thee and you suffered from hunger and all this stuff, but your clothes weren't old. Your feet didn't swell all these years. And so I wrote down, man only looked at his woes, but not at everything that was provided for him by God. And funny too, in verse 6 here, it says, therefore thou shalt keep the commandments of the Lord thy God to walk in his ways and to fear him. And before that, it says, thou shalt consider in his thine heart that as a man chasteneth his son, so the Lord thy God chasteneth thee. Basically meaning that God is saying, hey, I'm treating you like my child. I'm telling you what's best for you in life. And we continue on. We're almost done with this section. Moses reminds the people once again of their many rebellions and of how forgiving God was a lot of the times. And funny enough here, it says, lest the land whence thou broughtest us out say, because the Lord was not able to bring them into the land which he promised them, and because he hated them, he had brought them out to slay them in the wilderness. So essentially, when Moses was praying on behalf of all the people of Israel and saying, no, please continue to keep these people into the promised land, because if you don't, it'll just kind of come off as in that you weren't able to do that, which you promised, because you hated them. And so Moses is always looking for the benefit of the people. There's also a review of God's mercy when the 2 tablets of the 10 Commandments were destroyed. And we end this section on chapter 11, the promise of God's greatest blessings, where he says, the land into which I will bring you to is going to be the land that I care upon. The eyes of the Lord thy God are always upon it from the beginning of the year, even unto the end of the year, meaning that you're not really having to work for the land how you would be somewhere else where you don't possess it. This promised land is land that God cares for, and it will give you rain and it'll give you grass for your cattle, and you will be able to have everything that you need. And this last section here is a careful study of God's word is required, and a blessing and a curse are set before the people. And basically God says it's these commandments are a blessing, but they are a curse if you're not going to obey them. And I wrote down, God already knew all the ways in which the people will sin. So rather than witness a sin and then forbid it, he already anticipated all the ways in which man will stray and disobey and falter. And that's why he is wanting to set them up for success, because he is already telling them how they're going to fail or have problems. But as probably a lot of us know, humans being humans, just like a child, sometimes you can't be told what's good for you. Sometimes you have to experience it. And sometimes you have to go through the pain of learning that lesson instead of being it told, because then you actually learn it. So this is where we end today's day, and tomorrow, day 39, we start with chapter 12. I'll see you then.